Hello, hi everyone. Welcome to our second episode of 2T Money Talk. So this is me, Tony, and that's Terry, and we are the main host of this program. We'll talk about many different financial or how to make money and all the latest updates in the finance world. Today we have two guests with us, Victor and G. So Victor is the CEO and then G is the COO. Do you guys want to do a quick introduction to our viewers?
Sure. Just to be clear, we were totally forced into this. This is not rehearsed.
Yeah, I have a gun behind this guy.
Yeah, we just wanted to catch up and suddenly we're in a podcast. Okay. So we are Blockspace Technologies. A lot of what we do is kind of secret at this point, so we can't really go into many details. But yeah, we can talk in general, I guess. We've been doing it for 1.5 years now, and we just returned from China. Our first trip to China where we kind of are doing a business.
Yes. And this is sort of the reason why we invited them, because they just came back from China, and Victor, it was his first time in China, and I personally very interested in to know how he thinks about his trip as an entrepreneur and as well as a North American visiting both China and Hong Kong this time.
My name is Guo Wei, but people call me G. We started this company because we're really interested in the blockchain technology. We went to China and it's pretty amazing experience.
How does it feel? Because, in the heat of the last couple of months, financially and politically, there's a lot of things going on in Asia. This is not a political show. We don't talk about those kind of things. But how does it feel in general that when you guys are visiting?
Yeah, that was actually a super interesting experience. We did visit Hong Kong, kind of in the middle of the big heat that was going on there, which was very, very interesting. We kind of stayed on the sidelines, of course. You could definitely feel that something was happening in the city. But we spent most of our time in Shenzhen, which is about 40 minutes away from Hong Kong on the mainland side. And to be honest, I was kind of surprised at how unpolitical it was, or non-political. Kind of before we went to China, I was kind of worried about what I had previously said on social media, and that it would be very censorious or anything like that, but really it wasn't. So a lot of the things that kind of are stereotypes about China, I think, I didn't really experience that much. But maybe that was just personally, it just didn't come up. I was positively surprised, I guess, about that.
I think this is pretty common. Like you see how the social media or the media themselves, they're news. They need to create some kind of content. Yeah. But as a person and going to that, you'll find out perhaps there's some difference between the media and real life. Oh. I mean, in the beginning of the show, I was talking about as an entrepreneur and visiting China this time. And what's your experience business-wise or like development-wise? Is there any thoughts about the current China and Hong Kong?
One of the main impressions, I think, was that everything in China is just so much faster. We talked about the hiring earlier a little bit. So we hired a team in Shenzhen, and in terms of how long it takes to hire somebody, it's incredibly fast. Essentially, you interview them on the phone, then you send them some development homework to do. If they do it satisfactorily, you invite them to the office kind of for a personal interview, and then in the next 1 or 2 days, you make a decision and they start the next day. And then you can easily fire them as well. They typically don't wait for longer than a week before they just move on to the next offer.
I think in terms of the firing thing, both sides have the same expectation. That's kind of one of the reasons why the whole labor market is so, why it's so vibrant, because everyone's getting fired and everyone joining the new company. And I don't think it's a bad thing, but it's certainly making the whole industry very competitive.
And I was wondering, so in that case, is it very difficult to keep good employees in your company?
I guess it is difficult because we have expectation of if the employee gets a better offer from other company and they will just leave the company. And in China, the non-competitive clause is not enforced very thoroughly, so there is that likelihood. So even though it's a competitive market, you have to build a good vision for the team, and you have to create a good team dynamic so that everyone like to work with each other. So that's going to decrease their likelihood of leaving.
Yeah, I would add to that it's important how you treat people. The overall impression I got is that employees are not treated that well in China, at least compared to here. They're seen as very much people you can just fire and hire very quickly, so it doesn't really matter that much. I think our guys really appreciated that we were a bit more personally involved and really respected them, and of course we only hired really good guys, so that makes sense from that perspective. Another thing is that the really good developers, they tend to gravitate towards the large companies in China, the big tech companies, and those companies tend to have very draconian work environments in the sense that they do the 996, where they work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. So they have no life whatsoever. And we didn't have that. We had a more relaxed kind of schedule. We did work Saturdays, half days, but it's more relaxed than the big tech companies. So I guess that's a plus. For some people, that's a minus.
As many people know, like right now, I mean, Chinese government is pretty sensitive about the blockchain and how the application of that is being used in the market. And I think I will ask Terry to elaborate on this because Victor's and G's company is actually in that space. First of all, I think it's good for some viewers who might not know this problem as well. Maybe we can elaborate that first, and then we will talk about how Victor and G's startup is doing in the current situation.
First off, we have to know a bit about the background. In China, blockchain is actually embraced by the government. However, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and all the other alternative coins are not actually embraced. How they're not embracing is by preventing the traditional financial institutions from having to deal with all these kind of transactions. So if you have anything to do with these kind of cryptocurrencies, then you're in trouble. So no, they don't like cryptocurrencies. But the technologies itself is actually embraced, heavily promoting it to a degree that the CEO of China government, Mr. Xi, actually praised it as the futures of mankind. And so it's very encouraging news for everyone who's targeting the Chinese market, creating valuable technologies to get a foothold in the market. And that's the reason we think today's guest is going to provide some insights.
There's a bit of a divide in the blockchain space about a lot of things, very political. There's a bit of a divide in terms of when people say blockchain technology is separate from cryptocurrency. A lot of people think that is completely wrong and that cryptocurrency is actually the main application of blockchain technology. And it makes sense because currency itself provides incentive structure for the blockchain to work, at least in the case of Bitcoin, for instance, right? So blockchain itself is just a data structure that allows distributed network to reach consensus about a certain state of information. And the state of information could be basically anything. But in cryptocurrencies, the state of information is about who has how much money and who sent money to whom, right? Especially in 2017, we saw this huge rush into the industry of people from outside, and they said we can do anything with blockchain. There's a blockchain solution for everything, and that's really not true. It's a very limited niche kind of field, I think, and the number of applications is actually not that large, and we're still kind of figuring out, I think, what the field is really about. Because for a blockchain application to make sense, it has to fulfill a couple of requirements. It has to be a system in which the network of people doesn't necessarily trust each other or know each other. It's mainly about trust, really. So when people say we can do everything with blockchain, the first question is, well, can you do it with not blockchain? And most of the time the answer is yes, you can do it without blockchain. And then you should do it without blockchain because blockchain as a data structure is actually quite inefficient. So I don't know how much you want to talk about technology itself or just kind of business and market trends and stuff like that. But yeah, the Chinese government is definitely embracing blockchain. And we'll see how that goes. I think there are some very legitimate applications, but I don't think you can blockchain everything, so to speak. So it has to fit the niche requirement.
So I think after Victor explained about the technology, but I'm also quite interested to know what kind of application the Chinese government will be more interested to see and how it will help the economy, the country, or the world.
I guess the Chinese government's view on blockchain is comparable to the internet. From the government perspective, the internet connects everyone, connect every industry, so that they decrease the transaction cost of the information. That's what the internet has done. In terms of the blockchain, I think the Chinese government really wants the blockchain to solve the trust issue. So that because whenever we have an information exchange, we have to trust each other, either through contract or through like a centralized server. So government pump a lot of money into the blockchain technology. I mean, from their perspective, to increase the economic efficiency by dealing with this trust issue. So for example, I think it's on the news already that there's 4 national banks that have been using the blockchain technology to deal the internal transaction to settle down the payment. Just think about that, how much labor cost that's going to save if all the transaction is settled down automatically. I mean, people always kind of have the passion about supply chain management. That's another application on blockchain that Chinese government want to push. As Vicar says, blockchain is a technology that's going to solve the trust issue. So if the trust issue can be solved, then the efficiency is increased because a lot of things can be automated. I think government's pushing that.
Something to add to that as well is that if you look at the international banking system, if you just want to send money internationally, it's a real pain in the ass and it doesn't feel like we're in the 21st century at all. Kind of the SWIFT system. I mean, you're just transferring electronic information, but it takes 5 days. So what's going on, you know? And if cryptocurrency, even a government-backed currency that is put on the blockchain, for instance, like what China seems to want to be doing, if that can be more efficient, which I think it can, from a technology perspective at least, then that's going to win out in the long run. So then it just becomes a matter of political will, as well as whether people are willing to accept the fact that suddenly you're using a currency that doesn't have a cash kind of equivalent. There's no privacy, and it can potentially be restricted 100%. Yeah. So your money can be frozen instantly without you even knowing about it for much more easily. There's more centralized control, at least the potential of more centralized control. And that's why we're in the cryptocurrency space, we're seeing a big move towards privacy coins and kind of assets that are trying to avoid governments. And that's the original idea of Bitcoin as well, right? To have a global currency that has nothing to do with governments. But we'll see how that goes. I don't really know.
Very curious. I mean, why would the Chinese government want a currency that like not controlled by them?
Well, I mean, that's the idea, yeah. They would want to issue a cryptocurrency that is controlled by them 100%, right? And right now, the Chinese government has this problem where they're essentially operating with two different currencies. They're operating with the yuan and the US dollar. The yuan is for everything internally, and the US dollar is for everything externally. And for various economic reasons, that's not ideal for China. I think they want to be able to be a bigger player on the world market without being dependent on the US dollar, especially with current relationships kind of going into tension, yeah.
And do you think it's achievable?
Oh, you were talking about Chinese yuan versus US dollar? Blockchain technology? Oh, yeah, it's definitely achievable. One thing I want to add is the digital currency that Chinese government proposed. It's on the blockchain, but it's not the public blockchain. It's blockchain going to decentralize the trust. But in this case, it's decentralizing the trust between big banks, between like that 4 or 10 national banks, so that the settlement within them is faster. But from the outside view, it's still a centralized currency.
How did you like this trip? And is anything that's special, or is anything that you feel like it's such an advantage that they have but we don't in Canada, or vice versa, right?
It was a fascinating experience for sure. Overall, the impression was very positive. I think in terms of misconceptions, for instance, that I had, one of them was China has this image of being a relatively controlling authoritarian society, but you really don't feel that way at all in everyday life. You do see kind of police everywhere on every corner, but it's very casual and they don't seem like a threat at all. They're not even armed, really.
Can you use Facebook there?
Right. So in terms of the internet, it was kind of, you had to get used to it because everything is behind the Great Firewall. So all the apps and all the websites that I would usually use were not available. So you have to use a VPN, and even the VPNs are quite spotty. So that doesn't work all the time.
Exactly.
I think I want to add on that. I think that unique policy is a big factor why China is so powerful in the internet space. If you see the top 10 internet company, it's only US company or Chinese company. I think the Chinese government view the internet space not as free space. The Chinese government apply the geopolitical sense into the internet space. So because internet is a space that people can exchange information, they want to keep a boundary of it. Because at the time when internet is booming, in the technology sense, the Chinese economy in the internet space is pretty weak in 1990. US is pretty big at that time. So if you don't keep the boundary, then this space will be occupied by the US company. And that's what happened in every other continent outside the US and outside North America. I mean, we don't see many big European, technology company in the internet space. I think it's very interesting because from the outside, it seems that the Chinese government is very protective, is a very sensitive. But from another point of view, it creates such a land for local business to grow and to thrive.
From an economic point of view, it's very interesting because traditionally economics is all about free trade, and protectionism is generally seen as a negative policy. But in terms of China, it seems to have worked so far relatively well, probably because China is such a large system in itself and has so many people that it doesn't really need the outside world that much. So if your system is sufficiently large, protectionism might actually be a big benefit. But we'll see how it turns out.
Programming language itself has been dominated by the English language. And the English language is not spoken by the Chinese people. Do you think there's a slight chance, or is there any movement in China that's possibly going to happen within the blockchain space that can shift the balance, that can enable some other countries to have a foothold in the foundation layer of software technology itself?
China doesn't have a presence in the open source industry for a while. I think it's mainly because that if you are poor, if you don't have enough money, if you cannot sustain yourself well, the first thing you want to do is get a job and work for someone and get paid, right? But when you have enough money or you're rich enough, you will do some free stuff, more open source. That's the reason why we don't have enough open source code from China. In terms of the programming language, I think programming language is a logic of telling machine what to do. It doesn't matter what syntax you use. I mean, I can translate if to 是否 in Chinese. It doesn't change the essence of the programming language. The essence of the programming language is the logic of how it tells machine to do. So I think very likely it would have its own programming language in the future, but the syntax doesn't really matter. It will just be another Python or another Go that everyone can use. Whether they will have an edge on blockchain, I think so. I think we have seen this happened in other industry because like China pump a lot of money in car industry, and right now China can produce cars, and they have pumped money in the phone industry. Right now, the phone industry is basically a split between China, US, and South Korea. In blockchain space, yeah, I think there's a very high likelihood. Yeah.
Today, we're very happy to have Victor G on our show. And what's going to be really cool is if you have any questions, you can just put your questions down there and we'll do another episode just to answer all your questions. Right now, Victor and G cannot disclose what their startup is about, but I can tell you guys it's very exciting and it's a technology that solves a lot of problems. That's what I can say for now.
Hit subscribe, like us.